Welcome back to our channel. Join us as we delve deeper into the tumultuous lives of Genoa's most prominent residents, uncovering the drama surrounding Nicky's outburst against Nick's relationship with Marie. We'll unravel the complex web of drama, betrayal, and family loyalty that always captivates our attention. We're thrilled to join you on this journey to discover the latest shocking developments. Let's dive right into the heart of the story. The crushing weight of the Newman legacy has always been a double-edged sword, offering unparalleled power while demanding a devastating psychological toll. For Nicky Newman, this burden has never felt heavier than in the suffocating aftermath of her son's catastrophic descent into darkness. The matriarch of Genoa City's most formidable dynasty has spent decades perfecting the art of concealing her agonizing vulnerabilities behind a flawless facade. Yet, the recent events surrounding Nick Newman's near-fatal overdose at the squalid Park Motel have systematically stripped away every layer of her carefully constructed armor. The terrifying image of her beloved son lying motionless amidst the grim reality of severe substance abuse continues to haunt her waking hours. Nicky's own harrowing history with severe alcoholism makes her uniquely susceptible to the visceral terror of addiction, transforming her desperate need to save Nick into a frantic, obsessive crusade to pull him back from the precipice of destruction. As Nicky navigated the manicured pathways of the exclusive rehabilitation center where Nick was supposed to be seeking salvation, the pristine environment offered her absolutely no comfort. The clinical serenity of the facility, with its whispering fountains and soothing architectural lines, felt like a grotesque mockery of the violent, chaotic storm raging within her family. She had come to the facility driven by a fierce maternal instinct, desperately needing to witness some tangible sign of her son's recovery. She longed to see a glimmer of the strong, protective man he used to be before the suffocating pressures of his lineage drove him into the welcoming arms of chemical oblivion. Every step she took across the lush lawns was heavy with the exhausting anticipation of a mother trying to shield her child from a world determined to break him. However, the serene illusion of the rehabilitation center was about to be violently shattered by a reality far more toxic than she anticipated. Emerging from the shadows of a sprawling oak tree, Nicky's search for her son came to an abrupt halt. Her breath caught sharply in her throat as her eyes locked onto a scene that made her blood run cold. Seated on a secluded wooden bench, partially obscured from the main administrative buildings, were Nick and Marie Kirkland. The physical proximity between them was not the comforting, supportive closeness of two patients navigating the arduous journey of recovery together. Instead, it was a dangerous, magnetic intimacy, heavy with the unmistakable, suffocating aura of active addiction. They were leaning into each other, their body language radiating a shared, destructive secret, bound together by the phantom chains of the substances that had nearly claimed both their lives. The air between them seemed to crackle with a toxic dependency, a silent validation of their worst impulses masquerading as mutual understanding. Nicky's piercing gaze dissected the woman sitting beside her son. She recognized Marie instantly, not just as the woman who had flatlined in that wretched motel room alongside Nick, but as the physical embodiment of the abyss trying to swallow him whole. Drawing upon the painful reservoir of her own battles with addiction, Nicky read the subtle, insidious cues that defined Marie's presence. She saw the manipulative tilt of Marie's head, the enabling softness in her posture, and the desperate, codependent energy that radiated from her movement. It became horrifyingly clear to the Newman matriarch that Marie was not a stepping stone toward Nick's sobriety. She was a lit match hovering dangerously close to a powder keg. Marie represented the seductive, comforting numbness of giving up, offering Nick a sanctuary where his failures were not judged but shared and amplified, threatening to drag him down into permanent ruin. The sheer magnitude of this realization triggered a seismic shift within Nicky. The elegant, diplomatic society wife vanished entirely, replaced by a fierce, primal force of maternal protection. The simmering anxiety that had plagued her for weeks instantly crystallized into a blinding, righteous fury. Without a single thought for the public setting or the delicate protocols of the rehabilitation facility, Nicky marched across the perfectly trimmed grass, her heels sinking into the earth with the heavy rhythm of a war drum. Her eyes, blazing with an unyielding intensity, remained fixed solely on Marie, locking onto the woman as the ultimate enemy of her family's survival. The emotional temperature of the courtyard plummeted as Nikki closed the distance, her entire physical being radiating a terrifying, absolute authority that demanded immediate submission from the woman threatening her child. Arriving at the secluded bench, Nikki unleashed the full, devastating force of her wrath. Without uttering a single spoken quotation, she delivered a blistering, finger-pointing ultimatum that shattered the toxic bubble enveloping her son and his companion. Nikki's gestures were sharp, aggressive, and uncompromising as she physically inserted herself into their space, her trembling hand aimed directly at Marie like a loaded weapon. She made it unequivocally clear, through the sheer power of her presence and her commanding tone, that she would absolutely not allow another addict to drag her son back into the gutter. Nikki's declarations were a torrential downpour of maternal rage, outlining the catastrophic consequences that would rain down upon Marie if she ever dared to approach Nick again. She branded Marie as a dangerous catalyst for self-destruction, explicitly threatening to unleash the full might of the Newman Empire. The explosive nature of Nikki's intervention did not yield the compliant submission she had expected. Instead of awakening Nick to the danger of his situation, her aggressive intrusion ignited a massive, volatile explosion of resentment within him. Nick leaped to his feet, his physical movements erratic and fueled by the raw, unpredictable energy of early withdrawal and profound humiliation. The sight of his mother standing there, pristine and judgmental, dictating the terms of his existence in the very place where he was supposed to be confronting his darkest demons, pushed him entirely over the edge. He unleashed a deafening, visceral scream of frustration, his voice echoing violently across the tranquil grounds of the facility. The confrontation instantly devolved into a chaotic, emotionally devastating spectacle as Nick viciously pushed back against the suffocating weight of Nikki's interference in his personal life. The ensuing argument between mother and son was a brutal, heartbreaking display of fractured family dynamics. Nick's retaliation was fueled by decades of repressed anger regarding the Newman family's relentless need for control. He fiercely defended his connection with Marie, framing it as the only authentic, unvarnished relationship in his currently shattered life, a stark contrast to the polished, hypocritical expectations of his parents. He accused Nikki of crossing unforgivable boundaries, of treating his agonizing disease as just another corporate crisis to be managed and manipulated by the Newman machine. Every angry gesture Nick made, every furious accusation he hurled at his mother, was a desperate attempt to reclaim a shred of autonomy in a world where he felt entirely powerless. He viewed Nikki's protective rage not as love, but as a suffocating leash designed to drag him back into a pristine, suffocating cage that he fundamentally despised. Throughout this devastating familial implosion, Marie Kirkland remained a silent, insidious presence. She absorbed Nikki's vicious threats with the hardened resilience of a woman who had survived the darkest corners of addiction. Instead of shrinking away, Marie's subtle body language communicated a toxic solidarity with Nick. She positioned herself as the misunderstood victim of Nikki's elitist wrath, subtly reinforcing Nick's narrative that the world, particularly his powerful family, was entirely against them. This silent manipulation operated brilliantly under the surface, deepening the dangerous codependent bond between the two addicts. Marie's quiet defiance served as the perfect foil to Nikki's explosive aggression, making the matriarch appear irrational and overbearing in Nick's distorted, vulnerable perception, thereby cementing Marie's role as his only true ally in a hostile universe. The psychological fallout of this violent confrontation threatened to completely derail Nick's fragile grasp on sobriety. The massive surge of adrenaline, coupled with the profound emotional exhaustion of battling his own mother, left him dangerously depleted. The intense screaming match had stripped away the clinical safety of the rehabilitation center, replacing it with the very familial chaos that often triggered his deepest urges to escape. As the echoes of their argument faded into a tense, vibrating silence, Nick's internal craving for the numbing embrace of illicit substances skyrocketed to terrifying new heights. The confrontation had not severed his tie to Marie. Rather, it had forged it in the fires of mutual rebellion. Nick was now standing on the absolute razor's edge, viewing the structured environment of the rehab facility not as a sanctuary, but as a prison heavily guarded by his mother's expectations. While Nick battled his surging demons, the physical and emotional toll of the confrontation was quietly destroying Nikki from the inside out. As she turned her back on her furious son, retreating across the manicured lawns, her immaculate facade finally began to crumble. Her hands shook with a violent, uncontrollable tremor, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The sheer, terrifying reality of how close she was to losing her son had breached her deepest psychological defenses. The overwhelming stress of the encounter, combined with the crushing, omnipresent pressure of Victor's corporate machinations and the family's endless scandals, created a perfect, devastating storm within her mind. For the first time in a dangerously long period, the phantom, burning taste of vodka materialized on her tongue, an insidious, ghostly reminder of the one coping mechanism she had sworn to leave behind. The journey back to her car was an agonizing march through a minefield of resurrected cravings. Nikki's breathing became shallow and ragged as the overwhelming desire to completely numb her pain threatened to eclipse her rational thought. The terrifying realization that her fierce maternal love might be the very thing pushing Nick further into the abyss created a paradox of guilt and sorrow that felt entirely unbearable. She found herself gripping the leather steering wheel of her luxury vehicle until her knuckles turned a stark, translucent white. Her mind was frantically calculating the distance to the nearest, most obscure bar where she could vanish into the comforting oblivion of a double pour. The Newman matriarch, who had just fiercely commanded another woman to stay away from the darkness of addiction, was now teetering violently on the edge of her own catastrophic relapse. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the grounds of the rehabilitation center, the true consequences of the afternoon's explosive events began to take a sinister shape. Inside the facility, Nick Newman, trembling with unresolved rage and a desperate, clawing need for relief, made a silent, profound decision as he locked eyes with Marie, a shared understanding passing between them that entirely bypassed the facility's strict recovery protocols. Simultaneously, miles away in the isolated confines of her parked car, Nikki Newman slowly reached a trembling hand toward the glowing screen of her phone. Her tear-filled eyes stared blankly at the dashboard. She was no longer calling Victor or her sponsor. She was staring at the route to a secluded establishment she had not visited in years. The battle for Nick's soul had inadvertently triggered a terrifying chain reaction, leaving Genoa City bracing for a catastrophic dual collapse as mother and son stood paralyzed at the point of no return.